So that puts us at 26-6 going into Selection Sunday. And I think that's about where Santa Clara has to get if they have a shot at getting into the NCAA tournament. How's it going, everyone? And welcome back for another episode of the Unofficial WCC Hoops podcast. I'm Zach Farmer. Now a couple of weeks into WCC play. We had a lot of really good action over the course of the week. You can look at USF finally picking up a win, getting off the schneid there against LMU. You look at Portland and the struggles that Portland has had over these last few weeks, and especially this past week, getting trounced by St. Mary's by 42. You can look at the way LMU has been playing as well, and just kind of see that they're also kind of keeping pace with where we think that they might end up toward the end of the year. I'll go over I'm going to highlight some of the player awards that are handed out by the conference toward the end of the year, and I'm going to give my picks of where I think all of those are going to land right now. And obviously those could end up changing over the course of time, and we'll take a peek at that. We'll also take a peek at where all the net ratings are right now, because we're getting down to it now that we're only about, I'll say, 7 weeks away from Selection Sunday, March Madness. We can start to really kind of dive into seeing how teams are going to be able to put themselves in position as we get closer to March. But I'm going to start with a few of the big things that I saw in the second week of WCC play, and I have to start with Gonzaga. Gonzaga had a hell of a week, and yes, this is not a Gonzaga team that we're used to seeing struggle as much against WCC teams not named St. Mary's or BYU, but they went on the road and I thought was the toughest WCC road trip for the Zags all season long, and that was at USF and then at Santa Clara. USF had them on the ropes all game long on last Thursday, and it took a great performance from Rasheer Bolton in the second half of that one to bring him back. Drew Timme maybe had his worst game as a college player in that one, and Gonzaga still found a way to pull it out. On Saturday, we saw a similar situation where Gonzaga got down early, was really getting beaten to the boards. Santa Clara played a great game there in the first half. But like we saw against USF, Gonzaga was able to claw their way back in and make a game of this. And the difference in this one was Nolan Hickman. He had a career high 20 in that one. And this is where I feel like we're starting to see like what gives Gonzaga the difference, what gives Gonzaga the edge in these tough games, these tough-minded games. Is their guard play, because we know the greatness of Drew Timme. We know what Julian Strother can bring. We know what Anton Watson can bring. But as we've seen time and time again with this Gonzaga team going into, and also just teams that have success deeper into March, is the guard play. And over the last week, yes, there's been some consistency issues all across the board from the Gonzaga guards, but they really came through this week. Bolton on Thursday, and then, as I mentioned, Hickman on Saturday. These were two very good wins for Gonzaga, and now they're 5-1 in games that have been decided by less than 10 points. And I saw this tweeted out over the weekend, and I really do agree with this sentiment that this Gonzaga team may not be the most talented. This may not be on paper a team like some of the others we've seen over the last 5-6 years, but this Gonzaga team may be more battle tested by the time they get to March than any of the others we've seen in recent history. I mean, again, even we look back at last year's team, this Gonzaga team, even with a better overall, probably top of the conference, this was a Gonzaga team that was rolling through WCC teams. Yes, USF would give them a run, but they would still beat them by double digits. Santa Clara, same thing. BYU, same thing. So not to say that obviously isn't room for improvements with this Gonzaga team, but it does seem like that they feel more comfortable in these close games, these tight games, where maybe the likes of USF and Santa Clara have not been able to close the door on some teams. We've seen that with USF over the course of the season. We've seen them not close out on Arizona. We've seen it not happen against Davidson. We've seen it not happen against Gonzaga. This Gonzaga team really does feel like that they're kind of primed to, I think, be able to carry this forward, to be able to carry this momentum going deeper in the conference play. They do have BYU next on the road in Provo. It'll be the last time they'll be visiting Provo as BYU is leaving for the Big 12. So it'll be the last WCC game for Gonzaga at BYU this coming week. And that will be an interesting one as well. Like, this BYU team is playing really well right now. I don't think that Gonzaga is going to be able to completely run away from this team. I do expect the Zags still to be able to pick up a win in that one. But BYU, again, like, BYU's been an interesting team all year long. This is a team that does play up to its competition. So I expect this to be a good game and an incredibly raucous crowd at the Marriott Center. And as we talked about the games that Gonzaga has played this week, I really want to talk about Santa Clara, because right now Santa Clara is sitting at 2-2 in conference play, and they have the best shot, I think, outside of Gonzaga St. Mary's, who are the obvious ones who are going to be somewhere in the NCAA tournament, of who's that third team potentially. And right now, the resume says it's Santa Clara. And it's strange when you think about the team we saw a year ago with Jalen Williams, with Joseph Brankic, PJ Pipes. That was a team that I think many of us thought on paper might have been the best Santa Clara team that we've seen in a long time. But as we sit here in the second week of January, mid-January, this Santa Clara team might actually have an even better shot to get to the NCAA tournament than the one did a year ago. And this is not with winning the automatic bid in Vegas. So let's kind of run it down. So Santa Clara right now, their net is sitting at 79, which is okay. And they're going to need some help. Obviously, this is something that we know that is going to have to happen. But let's examine what they are. They are 14-5 right now. And those 5 losses are to St. Mary's, who is 8 in the net, Gonzaga, who's 13, UCF, who is 45, Utah State 26, and San Jose State 112. Okay, and easily pointed out, San Jose State, that's a bad loss, and is definitely going to be something that's looked at as we get closer to March. How about their wins? They have wins over Boise, who's 35, Iona, before Sunday, 36, and Irvine at 83. And then also USF at 111. So USF has some work to do, but they could also improve upon that, and the resume could look better. So that could actually end up helping Santa Clara in a little while down the road. So they have some okay wins. They have a couple of wins that are going to be like, oh yeah, those are better wins than you would think. Now, what about the remaining opportunities against resume building teams? You still have 2 more against BYU. You still have another game against LMU at the Levy Center. And then you have 2 road games at St. Mary's and at Gonzaga. Really, I think the baseline for what Santa Clara's potential here has to be is there's no room for error anymore. And by no room for error, I think this is what it means. Aside from the St. Mary's and Gonzaga games left on their schedule, Santa Clara will need to sweep. They'll need to sweep through the rest of the WCC games, maybe sans one hiccup, and I think that the hiccup can be one of the two BYU games. With that split against BYU, not counting the Gonzaga or St. Mary's games, that would put Santa Clara at 24-4. Sorry, that would put them at 24-5. Then even at 24-5, to me, it seems like that they still need the marquee win to guarantee getting in, which means that they would either need to win at St. Mary's or at Gonzaga. And let's say they split. So now 25-6. I think they need to get to the semis in Vegas. I don't think they need to win once they're there, but they need to reach the semis. So that puts us at 26-6 going into Selection Sunday. And I think that's about where Santa Clara has to get if they have a shot at getting into the NCAA tournament. I don't think they're going to get a lot of help from the rest of the WCC teams who continue to beat up on each other. I don't think they're going to get a ton of help from their other wins. Boise is in a Mountain West Conference that is just really beating up on each other, much like the WCC has done so far. I don't think they're going to get a whole lot of help from Irvine or Iona either on that front. The San Jose State could get better, but again, we talked about that Mountain West schedule, and San Jose State could climb back up, but there's also potential that they're going to slip back down. One of the challenges, and I think this was a challenge for St. Mary's a number of years over the past 15 years or so, has been avoiding the pitfall in conference play and not over relying upon some of the solid but not great wins in the non-conference. And this is because now you have to hope you don't have an off night at San Diego, that you don't have an off night against Pepperdine, that USF on the road ends up being a tougher game. Or again, like here, this is what's going to be painful for many to hear, is that while USF, I think we know as WCC fans and observers, the USF is not a bad team in any respect. But just the way that they are looked at in the metrics, they could potentially be a bad loss for Santa Clara. And because of that, Santa Clara has to be able to avoid these pitfalls, these challenges throughout the course of WCC play. Again, there's still some opportunity for them to climb back up, but I really think the greatest opportunity for Santa Clara is a clean slate. That's their best shot, minus St. Mary's and Gonzaga, to really put themselves back into the conversation. I think for Santa Clara to be taken seriously as an at-large contender, they're going to have to get their net back up probably somewhere right around 40-45 to be taken seriously. And realistically, even what we saw with USF a year ago, they had a net rating of 26 and they ended up being a 10 seed. So we know that it can be difficult, especially for mid-major teams, to make that leap, make that next jump. Santa Clara, I think, has a shot. I think it's a small shot to still do it. But I do think that this team has shown over the last week and a half that they are talented enough to be able to, I think they're talented enough to pull it off. And if they are to do so, I think that they will be one of the more dangerous teams in March, especially when you look at the backcourt of Carlos Stewart and Brandon Pajemski. And the third thing I wanted to touch on and talk about, and I want to talk about it now before they start to hit a much tougher part of their schedule, and that's Pacific. Pacific has now won 3 games in a row. I know, like I did not think I would be saying that Pacific was the first WCC team to get to 3 wins in conference play. I did not think that I would be saying that Pacific is now tied for third place in the WCC. But they have done the work and done the job that they probably should be doing. They were at home and defended home court against LMU. Then they went on the road this past week and won at San Diego and at Pepperdine. And we talked about all off season long. I said it, a number of people said it, every poll said it. This Pacific team was supposed to finish 10th. And right now, Pacific has already put themselves in a great position to not finish at the bottom of the league. They over this 3-game win streak, they're shooting 49% from the field. They're shooting 40% from 3. They're holding opponents to 41% from the field. I think one of the amazing components of what we've seen from Pacific over these first few WCC games has been just the depth of the rotation that this team is using. This is a team that's using 9 players on an average of 21 minutes per game. And we're really seeing different guys be able to step up, different guys being that leading scorer, being the guy on a given night. And again, in these 3 games, it's been Kalen Boone, it's been Judson Martindale, it's been Nick Blake. Like we've seen a number of guys be able to step up in these roles, and Pacific I'm not saying like Pacific's going to end up like 5th or 6th or anything like that. I think it's way too early to start to look at Pacific in that way, in any shape or form. But Pacific has really been impressive early on in WCC play, especially as we have a number of teams who look like they're faltering. Pepperdine hasn't won a game yet. San Diego also has not played particularly well. This is a Pacific team that is also going to, let's see, who they have on the schedule this week. I'm going to go back and look it over. They only have 1 game this week, and it's going to be back at home against Santa Clara. Now, again, like talked about, this is a Santa Clara team who is probably has tournament aspirations. So tall order for Pacific going into this week. But I don't think that you can really look at Pacific as being the pushover that they were a year ago. This team is clearly more talented and tougher than they were a year ago. And they've already picked up some pretty solid early wins and have put really some of the other teams in the conference on their heels, because I mean, Pepperdine and San Diego were a couple of those teams that were also picked to finish toward the bottom of the league. LMU was one of those teams picked to finish toward the bottom of the league. We know LMU, that won't be the case for LMU anymore. But just looking at Pacific, looking at what they've done so far, I think you have to feel really good if you're a Tigers fan and looking at this team, because it does look like they're pointed in the right direction. And it may look ugly at times. It may look really ugly at times with some of the games that are going to be coming up, but you have to give credit for where credit is due, because they are 3-1, and that's where Pacific is right now. So just hats off to head coach Leonard Perry and how he's gotten these guys really ready to play in the West Coast Conference. All right. So one of the things that was not released, but I did spot over the weekend was Ken Palm has puts together a list of just all like the all conference teams based on based on ratings and everything else. And for the and I saw the all WCC team, or what it would be today. And it's an interesting group. I think a lot of names make sense. So on that team, you have Drew Timme, which obviously no surprise there. Only 5 on this all WCC team, unlike the real all WCC team, which end up having 10. So Drew Timme was the top slot, followed by Mitchell Saxon at number 2. That was an interesting thing to see, that he was the second most efficient player in the league, or like predicted player in the league. Brandon Pajemski right after that at 3, Cam Shelton at 4 at LMU, and then the interesting name amongst it, Aiden Mahaney at St. Mary's. There have not been very many freshmen who have been on this list over the course of the years. All of them are real familiar names. The likes of Jalen Suggs, Chet Holmgren, and others are the ones that really kind of that have highlighted that list as freshmen. So Aiden Mahaney's in very good company when it comes to that. But that got me thinking about the player awards and who's probably slotted into which one at this time. So as a reminder, the WCC there's player of the year. They do newcomer, sixth man, coach, and then defensive player of the year. So I'll start with the obvious one, because I don't think it's not close yet, but I think the margin is shrinking. Right now, I think the runaway is still Drew Timme as player of the year. So I'll start there. Player of the year, Drew Timme. We talked about it last week, how just incredibly efficient he had been over the last like few weeks. He had maybe one of his worst weeks this week. So, and that's always going to happen at some point, especially against the teams who know how to game plan against you a little bit better than most. So I expect Drew Timme to bounce back this coming week. So right now, Drew Timme, I think he's the obvious one, player of the year. Next one, I think this one's also pretty obvious. The newcomer of the year, this is Brandon Pajemski. I don't think there's any question about that. I mean, he's come in, transferred from Illinois, and he has been everything Santa Clara could have ever hoped for. He's leading the team in scoring and rebounding, assists, steals. Like, this guy has been everything, and he's doing it against the best teams. He's already averaging 20 points per game in conference play. He had 15 against Gonzaga the other night. He is showing that he really is maybe the best singular. He's definitely the best perimeter player in the WCC right now, and I don't think you can question that. He is the one guy who's like, if Drew Timme is going to get competition for player of the year, that's going to be Brandon Pajemski. And so we'll see how it all goes. I think that completely depends upon how Santa Clara ends up finishing in WCC play. If somehow like they end up, if they do what I talked about earlier, somehow run the table and knock off Gonzaga or St. Mary's and end up in like second or third place, I think you can start to legitimately make the case for Brandon Pajemski, just the impact he would have made on this team. So I think right now it's easy pick for newcomer of the year. Now it gets a little bit harder. And I'll start with coach of the year. I think this one's a little harder because there's a few coaches that I think you could point to as having had the tougher challenges going into the year, the success of what the teams have been so far. But the one I point to right now, the one I think that I would say has had the best year, I'm saying in Santa Clara, and I'm going to say it's Herb Sendek. I think Santa Clara came into the year, and as a lot of us pointed out, what's going to happen after Jalen Williams is gone? What's going to happen after Josip Brankic is gone? What's going to happen after PJ Pipes is gone? Was Brandon Pajemski going to be that guy? Was Carlos Stewart going to be able to really develop quickly? What were we going to get out of Parker Brown? Was Keyshawn Justice going to be able to keep it up if he had to be the number one or number two option? Health was another concern. Jordan Williams has still not played, and so there was a number of things that really had to go right for Santa Clara, and it really has gone right overall for the Broncos. I think it depends on where. Now, the other name that comes to mind, and it really depends on where they finish, is Stan Johnson. If LMU does finish in the top half of the league, I think you can have that conversation that, considering where they were a year ago, just the just how much that they had to overcome this past year. A lot of changes on that roster as well, although they still had a couple of staples, Cam Shelton and Kelly Laupepe coming back. This was a team that had very little expectations, and now they've rebounded from those promises. Promises of a couple of years ago. So I think Stan Johnson, you can have that conversation if they finish in the top half of the league. But if I'm making a pick right now, I'm probably going with Herb Sendek. I think you can still make the case for Randy Bennett. You can make the case for Mark Few. You can always do that. But right now, that's where I would make my pick. And we'll go to sixth man. And I think this one is a little harder because a lot of times sixth men in this league end up being starters, full-time starters later on in the year. And to an extent, that's what's happened with this player. Although he's only started 5 games to this point, I think, and he's only started 5 games, and all 5 of those starts have come within the last few weeks. But I do think that he will still qualify for this by the end of the year, and that's Zane Meeks. Zane Meeks has really come into his own this year for USF. He's averaging 12 points off the bench, 22 minutes per game. His efficiency has been way better than it was a year ago. I think he has been one of the more pleasant surprises across the league. Meeks has really given USF something that they were missing going into the year. They needed someone who could stretch the floor. They needed someone down low who was going to bang, and this is what he's been able to give them. So a lot of the promise that I think Zane Meeks brought in a year ago to this team, he's really started. It's now paying dividends for this team. So Zane Meeks would be my sixth man of the year right now. You can make the case maybe for Kalen Boone. He hasn't had too many starts quite yet, but he's started the last 6 or 7. So I don't think he'll quite qualify by the end of the year because he's now starting consistently, where Meeks is still a little. I think they're so matchup driven that he's still coming off the bench a fair amount. And then defensive player of the year. This one was a little harder because I felt like that there wasn't a clear defensive player of the year. If you look around the league last year, it was real easy. It was Chet Holmgren, and that wasn't a question. But looking at the WCC this year, while no one jumps out, I think there's one guy who has been so consistent and so impactful, and he's the vocal captain, kind of the quarterback for the best defensive team in the conference. And right now I would pick Kyle Bowen. And it's funny because I feel like there's a couple of guys on St. Mary's who could potentially win this award, but right now Kyle Bowen is playing so well. The way he's able to kind of guard multiple positions. He's number 1 in the nation in defensive win shares. He is second on the team in rebounding per game. He's the first in defensive rebounds at 8 per contest. He really has been he's been everything that St. Mary's has needed on the defensive end. And as good as he was a year ago, and he had some impressive performances last year, I feel like he's been even better this year. And especially in the games where it does seem like the other guy I think that could have been in this conversation is Logan Johnson. And every so often when and I think it's almost like the difference here, like this is going to be a very Bay Area um example of just like the comparison. Not obviously they're not like these guys, but I think this is kind of like the comparison I'm looking at. That the Logan Johnson Kyle Bowen scenario to me seems is almost like Klay Thompson and Draymond Green for the Golden State Warriors, where Klay Thompson is that one-on-one stick to a guy defender. That's Logan Johnson. He is a great one-on-one defender, on-ball defender. Like he might be the best in the league at that, and he was a year ago. So Logan is one of those guys, but the way I look at it right at this point is that Kyle Bowen has been that Draymond Green. Draymond Green is the quarterback, he's the captain, he's kind of running the defense on the backside, and that's what Kyle Bowen does. He runs that defense on the back end. You can hear him out there being vocal. He's directing traffic behind on that back line for St. Mary's. He a lot of time, almost all the time, he draws the assignment of the toughest post player. We know he's versatile enough to play inside and out. So I would go as my defensive player of the year right now to Kyle Bowen. So for quick review, so player of the year, Drew Timme, newcomer, Brandon Pajemski, coach of the year, Herb Sendek, sixth man, Zane Meeks, and then defensive player of the year, Kyle Bowen. And as we start to look at this coming week, we can't not start to look at the net ratings. And we talked about Santa Clara and what their situation is and everything else. I think it's going to be tough for the likes of BYU or USF to get back into the conversation. I think as of today, BYU was 90, LMU was 100, and then USF is 111. I think it's a wrap for USF. Long shot for LMU, and I just don't see BYU picking up enough steam to be able to get back into the conversation. But let's take a look at the top. And after this week, a week ago, we looked at the net ratings, and Gonzaga was 13 in the net and St. Mary's was 14 in the net. 1 week later, it's St. Mary's at 8 and Gonzaga still at 13. And largely, obviously, that St. Mary's one, I think, is one attrition from teams above them, but then also just the beatdown they put on Portland on Saturday by 42. I mean, I've seen St. Mary's beat down Portland in the past. I've seen them beat down other teams this year, but this just it felt different against Portland. It felt like that this was a team that was so focused, so determined. They just beat Portland at every loose ball all night long. And as far as the net ratings, like this is what's getting interesting. Is like, so this is a St. Mary's team that is again is number 8 right now. Last week they only received 3 votes in the AP poll when they were 14 in the net, and also they were right about the same spot in KenPom. So it does feel like the St. Mary's team is still not getting enough respect for the work that they've been able to do. I understand that, like, they don't have like the marquee win. They haven't beaten a big name school or anything like that. San Diego State still being the best win. But now if you go back and look, North Texas is looking better and better. You go back and look at some of the others, like you have some really good games that St. Mary's has now played. And I think it's not just that, but it's that the fact that the 4 losses that St. Mary's does have are by a combined 15 points. They're not getting blown out by anybody. They only lost to the number 1 team by 5 on a neutral court. The computers have been very friendly, very good to St. Mary's all season long. A lot of the bracketology has St. Mary's right around an 8 or a 9 seed right now. I think obviously we know that the matchup with Gonzaga is going to be a huge one for both teams. It almost this almost feels like we're on a collision course for Vegas, where St. Mary's Gonzaga are going to be. This is going to feel like 2012 in a way. For those who don't remember the 2012 season, that was a year where we knew both teams were going to be in the NCAA tournament before we ever got to Vegas. And that game ended up being for bragging rights. That game was all about pride. And I feel like that's what we're heading towards for this coming season, this coming time in Vegas, is that these two teams, both teams are not going to be concerned. And obviously it's always like, is St. Mary's going to be in? Assuming that there's not like a complete collapse at some point, this St. Mary's team will be in the tournament and very comfortably in the tournament again. So with St. Mary's comfortably in, with Gonzaga comfortably in, I think these ratings show like this is just going to be total bragging rights for both of these squads. Both matchups in the regular season, I think, are going to be amazing. I think we're going to get, I think the non-conference schedule that St. Mary's saw, a tougher average non-conference schedule that St. Mary's saw, has really put them in great position. I mean, you look at the 3 games that they played, they have beat down San Diego, they've beat down Portland. They played a very good Santa Clara team on the road and pulled out a victory. But we're up in double digits in that game as well. So I think St. Mary's is in a good spot. Gonzaga is in maybe a little bit of an unfamiliar spot, but they're still going to be a 2, 3, or 4 seed. That's where they're going to end up landing by the time we get to March. So there's not a whole lot of concern to me for either of these teams. The net ratings for me is it really comes down to like what's Santa Clara going to do? How are they going to be able to keep this momentum going and put themselves in position? Can they put themselves in position? And taking a look at the schedule for this week, St. Mary's has actually one of the tougher weeks going in. They'll be hosting LMU on Thursday, and then they will be at USF on Saturday. Gonzaga will be hitting the road again. They're going to be in Provo on Thursday before they head back home to play Portland, a really struggling Portland team who has been banged up. Tyler Robertson did return last Saturday, but they were still without Moses Wood, so that is still something to watch out for. The game with USF at Portland, again, like these are two teams who have not played particularly well so far in conference play. So this is going to be another battle. And keep in mind that it was Portland who did knock off USF late in the year last year. So these two teams are probably going to have another fist fight with each other going into that one. Santa Clara is at Pacific on Saturday. Again, we talked about this a little earlier. This means a lot for Santa Clara. They need to be able to keep it rolling, keep their strong play going forward throughout the course of WCC play. They can't have any slip-ups. Pacific is playing well right now. They did beat LMU at the Spanos Center, so you have to watch out for what's going to happen there. And then for LMU, outside of the St. Mary's games, which is obviously another huge one for them, they have to take care of business against San Diego back at Gersten Pavilion on Saturday. So I think there's a lot of great matchups here this week. Biggest weeks, I think, to me, look like St. Mary's and then also USF. USF needs to pick themselves off the mat. For St. Mary's, you got to keep it rolling. You have 2 strong opponents, which will just help the resume even more. So you just got to play the way they do, play the defense the way they do, and just be able to score enough on the road, and then also defend the home court. All right, and with that, that'll wrap up this episode of the Unofficial WCC Hoops podcast. Be sure to subscribe on YouTube. Be sure to follow me on Twitter and TikTok at Posts by Zach. Be sure to like, share, and favorite the podcast on your favorite streaming service. And on YouTube, I'll go back to YouTube and just like, if you're going to search us, be able to search Unofficial WCC Hoops Podcast. And with that, I'll get out of here. Have a good week, and I will catch you next time.